This is Theology on the Go, a brief interview about an eternal truth.
A lot of the choices that we make toward our vocation, we're making right now in little choices. Jesus says, he who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so I encourage people to prepare right now. I told a group of high schoolers last week that by the time I finished high school, I had already closed a number of doors that I could not open again because I had not prepared well.
Hello and welcome to Theology on the Go. My name is Jonathan Master. I am joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, James Dolezal. James, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this conversation with William Boekestein, who is pastor of Emmanuel Fellowship Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And we are here to talk about his new book. It's a little book, but a very helpful book, called Finding My Vocation, a guide for young people seeking a calling. So thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
I want to begin with just an overarching question. As you've met young people over the years within the church, how do most of them try to answer this question? It's obviously a big question. What am I supposed to do with my life? What kind of work should I engage in? And you wrote this book to try to help young people who are thinking through that question that I think everyone has at some point. What are the normal ways, or maybe some of the unhelpful ways, perhaps, that people in that position try to answer this question of what I should do?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I wrote the book for people, I think, in four primary categories. Some people are apathetic. They don't really care. They just figure it's going to work out. Maybe don't put too much thought into their future. Others are ambivalent. They may be conflicted between a couple different opportunities or very confused about what to do, but they do care and they do want to know how to live well. Some are anxious, sure that the future is going to be more difficult than they can handle. And then some are ambitious, and that can be good, but that can also be troubling as well. There's a bad kind of ambition. So I think, and sometimes those four possibilities are in the same person from moment to moment. So it is a hard thing, and especially in our day with so many options and with seeing other people on social media, how they're doing their future, it can be a hard thing today. So we're going back to Scripture and seeing, I think, really just two things: God's sovereignty in the lives of his people and our responsibility to choose wisely. And I think that's really a quick summary of the book.
So I want to get back to that quick summary because I think that does capture what you're trying to do here. But can you just briefly walk us through what you generally want to say to each of those four categories? If they're struggling with apathy, if they're struggling with perhaps being overly ambitious or anxious, or how is it that what message do you want to get across to each of those categories of people?
Yeah, I think to the apathetic, I would say your choices matter. You have real agency, real responsibility to choose wisely. And if you think about our place in history and in culture today, we have a level of choice that people in other places and other times never dreamed about. And so that's a real responsibility that we have to take seriously. So we have to care about the choices that we make. And a lot of the choices that we make toward our vocation, we're making right now in little choices. Jesus says, he who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so I encourage people to prepare right now. I told a group of high schoolers last week that by the time I finished high school, I had already closed a number of doors that I could not open again because I had not prepared well, because I was apathetic about my future. And then for those who are either ambivalent or anxious, I think it's very important to stress the sovereignty of God and the goodness of God, that God does the calling and the appointing. He has a plan that is good for his children. He cannot fail. He cannot be frustrated. And so he will put you in that place, and you have to live faithfully in that place and leading up to that place. But you can lean on the Lord, who is qualified to get you there and to give you a meaningful vocation, to weave all of your strengths and weaknesses and various opportunities you'll face into something good. And then for those who are ambitious, I think ambition is good. I've had friends when I was younger who knew just what they wanted to do when they were in middle school, and they pursued that dream. And that's good. But I write in the book about not allowing our ambition to push out other important responsibilities, like our responsibilities to family and to the church, and how you make your vocational plans will impact the rest of your life. And there can also be a caution here for those who are ambitious. Sometimes what we set our hearts on is not where the Lord brings us. And so we have to be careful to resist this modern mantra of follow your passion. If you're excited about something, that is certainly what you need to do. And some things that we're passionate about are simply not employable, or in a particular moment are not employable, but they can be parts of our lives. So I think, a common notion of vocation is, well, you need to combine your interests and your gifts into doing something meaningful. And I think that's right, mostly. But sometimes the things we're excited about or think we're good at, the Lord has other plans for us, and we need to be thoughtful about that. Have a plan A, a plan B, maybe a plan C.
Should we make a distinction between vocation and employment? Is that, at least conceptually, is there a different way to think of those two?
Yes, you're exactly right, James. And in the book, we do focus mostly on occupation, how to choose an occupation. But vocation is simply the calling of God on your life. And so I think a good place to start for that might be 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17, where Paul says, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. So that life is going to be have multiple vocations interacting with one another. So we could think about our calling or our responsibility in the family, and in the church, and in the civil sphere, and also at our work. And so, yes, you're exactly right. There is a difference, but the primary focus here is on our occupational life.
A question, I can follow up on that a little bit. A question, sometimes people struggle with changing jobs, and they can almost feel like, well, if there's this divine vocation that said, you should be a sanitation worker, and you have, and you want to be a florist or something like this. I mean, how do you navigate a kind of change of employment? Is there a room for, I want to be careful and call it a sort of holy discontent that says, I need to pursue the Lord's calling in my life in a different line of employment. I'll give you a concrete example. Jonathan used to be my boss, and then he quit and he went and became someone else's boss. And he decided, and that's okay. Like I'm all right with that. I actually think it was a really good move for him and for a lot of people. But like, when people are faced with those decisions, do I stay? Do I go? What are some principles from Scripture that would just help us think through that question?
Yeah, well, one of the important principles is that as Christians, we really should be aiming high. We should be aspiring. So Paul says, for example, in 1 Corinthians 12:31, earnestly desire the best gifts. And Calvin, in commenting on that, says that Christians must apply themselves the more diligently to those things which are of most conducive to edification. So I would put it this way: all other things being equal in terms of my qualifications and maybe compensation that would provide for me and my family, we should strive to do those things in which we think we can do the most good. Now, Calvin says that for his money, that's a magistrate. And we might disagree with that, seeing magistrates as being the highest calling. But his logic behind that was they have an opportunity to influence people for good or for evil. And so I think influence is one. What value we're going to be bringing to the world and to the church. If your qualifications allow you to do something that is more impactful, you should pursue that. So I think the idea is influence, and of course that will mean something different for everyone. That's why there are multiple gifts among the people of God. Some will exert tremendous influence in the kingdom by being a mom, raising godly children, and others will be influential in business or church or politics. So I think we have to ask, how can I be of best influence? And then actually, a couple of appendices in the book interact with that question a little bit, James, where sometimes we have we have unhappiness about our work. So what do I do if I hate my job, for example? And part of that is, well, maybe you're just discontent. You're unhappy being the low person on the seniority ladder, and you just need to persevere. But there are some instances in which work can be soul crushing. And if you're engaged in a kind of work that's bad for you, for your heart, for your family life, then you need to reconsider perhaps what you're doing.
I'm glad you brought up that question of influence, because I've always found that to be very difficult to pin down. We don't know exactly where we're going to be most influential and most useful to the kingdom. I mean, there are some measures that we can use that seem obvious to us. If we have more people in a crowd that we're speaking to versus fewer people, that seems like greater influence. But it's very, I know you've thought this through. That's a very difficult one, because I don't know that we're always good judges of that, and the ways that we think we're going to exercise influence, particularly when it comes to engagement with the world, are often so difficult for us to pin down. But I mean, I take the point in a general sense, but then when you get into the details, you can sort of tie yourself in knots over that, I think.
You can, and it would be easy to call a desire to be influential. You could call it that, but it might just be ambition. It might just be a desire to be well known or to be appreciated. And so you need to resist that. But Puritan John Cotton puts it this way: an ideal vocation is fitted to me and my best gifts, for God would have his best gifts improved to the best advantage. And so part of this, I'm sure, is trusting the Lord. Like, we don't know, right? I mean, like you just said, Jonathan, you might be given an opportunity to give a speech before 50 people or 500 people, and the speech that you give to 50 people may be more impactful, more influential. You don't know, so you have to trust the Lord, and make sure that your priorities are in the right place. But do consider how your gifts might contribute better in a particular arena. So I think the idea of stewardship is important. We have to give an account of our stewardship, as Luke 16 says. To whom much has been given, much is expected. And so I think a lot of it is just making sure that we're using our gifts and our talents to the best of our ability. I know the prayer of Jabez has been abused in the past, but there is a right sense, I think, in the heart of Jabez to have a desire for enlarged borders within which to do God's work. And so be careful of sinful ambition and desire to make a name for yourself, but do try to do the most good you can. You don't know exactly how that's going to all work out, but you trust the Lord that he can use your stewardship in a way that brings most glory to him and most good to your neighbor.
All right, let's go back then to the book itself. We're putting this in the hands primarily of I really think it's a book anyone could read profitably. I really enjoyed reading it myself, but primarily we're putting this book in the hands of people who fall into one of those four categories you outlined at the beginning, who are younger people, maybe on the front end of thinking through these questions of vocation and occupation. How is it that you think they should walk through that thought process?
Mm-hmm. Well, the book is laid out in three parts. First of all, ponder the top. We have to understand what vocation is. The fact that I, as a Christian, have a calling from God. I may not know exactly what that is, but I need to understand that my work matters, and that's a huge part of who I am. It is a part of my identity. We, in that section, walk through reasons for work. I think a lot of Christians haven't been taught the virtue of work. It's sort of merely looked at as a means to provide for yourself and your family, and perhaps for the church as well. But work is truly part of how we're to image God. And so some work on the front side of just understanding what it means to not just say, I want to glorify God, but how am I actually going to do that? What what does that look like in the real world? The second part of the book is on preparation. So what are some of the ways that as a young person, especially, I can be best prepared to be able to have something to offer? So I don't know if I did not think about this as a young person, but vocation is really an exchange. I'm hoping to get something, but for myself, for my family, for the world, but I have something to offer as well. And so we talk about gaining wisdom and cultivating character and developing skills. Those are things that have real value in the world. And especially the character piece, that's something that we're all forming one little decision at a time. But that's who we're going to bring to the jobs that we're going to have someday. So have something to offer, and then choose wisely. How do I make difficult decisions? And I'd encourage young people to be well informed, to know their options. I didn't really know what options lay before me when I was a young person, and how those might or might not harmonize with my abilities. So know your options, know yourself, listen to other people, get good advice from school counselors or your pastor or other trusted individuals. And then some of the other things we've touched on already, be ambitious, aim high, try to be as productive as you can in God's world. So make those kinds of choices, but then also be realistic. And, we have to bring reality into our vocational choice, because our pick A may not be reasonable. And then the last section is on practicing. What are the best practices for succeeding in a vocation? And then the appendix is just a number of questions that, what if I hate my job? What if my job is compromised by sin? We have a appendix on college. Is college for me? What about military? And then a calling to the ministry, which is obviously not the focus of the book, but I think a lot of people and churches today don't really understand the calling process of a minister. And so I do think a lot of young men sort of out of hand dismiss a call to the ministry because it seems so mysterious and so unknown that it couldn't possibly be for them. And so I think that's an important thing for our churches and our members to understand as well.
You say in the book, Bill, that you need, at one point, that you need a theology of rest. And I think sometimes we pit these against each other, work and rest, and we all know workaholics, and they're ambitious and they aim high, and yet somehow something seems misdirected in that. What role should rest? I guess what I want to say is, how can we have a theology of rest that doesn't become an excuse for indigence? Maybe I'm speaking for myself. Just
yeah, no, that's a really good question. We are called to be producers. I mean, that is, we're made in God's image to be workers, but we're not God, right? God doesn't need to rest. He did rest to pattern our lives. And so he's given us a Sabbath every week so that we can rest from our labors, to find ourselves and our life in Christ, but also to give us strength to be able to go on to do the work that's set before us in the week to come. So we need rest physically and mentally to actually be producers, but also we need rest so that we don't trick ourselves into thinking that we are what we do. So we need at least one day a week where we're not producing, we're not earning, we're simply receiving from God, so that we understand our place in God's economy. And in the chapter on rest, I focus not only though on Sabbath rest, but also daily rest, how to just be a rested person. I mean, you could take a Sabbath and be frazzled Monday through Saturday by not getting the quantity of rest you need, which is pretty basic, but also quality rest. How can you go into work every morning refreshed and feeling creative and prepared to do your best work? And so I do think that being a well-rested person, not just physically and mentally, but spiritually as well, is really key to being a lifelong producer for God.
Bill, we're basically out of time, but I did have one last question that I wanted to ask you. You've talked about this. You've given addresses and taught on this in different groups. You mentioned at the beginning, just a week or so ago, speaking to some young people. What are some of the main either questions or concerns that they've had that have come out of this? And have any of them been surprising to you? In other words, you aimed this book at 4 categories. I think those those intuitively make sense to us. But what are the things that you're hearing? I know it's somewhat anecdotal, but what are the things that you're hearing as you've kind of given yourself to address this to people who are in precisely this situation?
The question, the person that I hear from most, I think, is the anxious person. How am I going to find the right thing for me? I mean, it's different for the three of us. We're in a more settled position. Of course, our futures could change drastically as well, but we have a pretty good sense of how we're supposed to live our life for God's glory vocationally. But when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, you just don't know. And so I think one of the most important things I can say to young people like that is, you don't have to know. Just like you don't have to know that, you don't have to find that one person that you're to marry out of many billions of people around the world. God knows, and God will take care of it. He will. He has. So Calvin talked about vocation as a sentry post at which God stations his people. God already has our post. He already has that place for us. And he will station you there, and you just need to be faithful in the meantime. And there may be many things that you not only could do well, so you don't have to find that one thing, but there are also many things that you probably will do well, and your vocations can change over time. Your first couple of years, you may be in an entry-level job, but that's still part of your vocation. It's part of how you're living before God's face. So I think the main application is, or the main answer to that question is, be faithful in little things, and the Lord will give you opportunities to be to be faithful in larger spheres of influence, and he will guide you the whole way through.
Bill, thanks for giving us some time today, and really do appreciate your work on this. The book is called Finding My Vocation, a guide for young people seeking a calling. So thanks for your time today.
I appreciate you both. God bless you. Thanks.
James, I've read through this book pretty carefully, and I would certainly put it in the hands of young people, college students. Really, as I said in the interview, I would recommend it really to everyone. I enjoyed reading it. I learned some things from it that were very helpful. But I'm curious, because you spend most of your working hours with students who are, I would say, by and large, still wrestling with these issues. So did the categories that he introduced and the approach that Bill outlined, did that resonate with you? Are there other issues that you see emerging, maybe more than what he pointed to?
Well, they could be covered in aspects of the book we didn't discuss. But no, I think this does actually get to many of their concerns. I think especially the question of what is work for. What they hear often, maybe not from their pastors, but certainly from the world, is you've got to do what you love. And I understand that it can be, he talked about it being soul crushing, but there is a certain sense in which you can learn to love a work that right now you might not even be able to imagine lays before you. And there is something about learning to love the work as well. I think often it's just on the side of you already have to have that love and then you go and seek the employment. Whereas you could actually learn to love the calling in which God has placed you and find a contentment in it. And I think his book really addresses that as well, of finding contentment, of what it takes to really prepare yourself to be a good employee and thereby a provider and a blessing to other people through the fulfillment of your vocation. But in particular, I think thinking about pleasing God and learning to love what he's called me to do and finding a contentment in it.
Well, the book, just again, I'll give the title again, Finding My Vocation, a guide for young people seeking a calling, by William Boekestein. We would recommend it to parents, to young people, to those who are thinking through this or who know someone who is thinking through this question. It's very user-friendly. It's under 200 pages, very readable, divided up into obvious sections so that you could even dip into certain question if you had certain questions. So we'd commend it to you. We have a couple of copies to give away. So if you want to enter for the opportunity to win one of those, you can do that at placefortruth.org or theologyonthego.org. There's a place for you to enter your information and perhaps win a copy of it. Also, if you're able to donate to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, that really helps us keep doing what we're doing. And you can do that at alliancenet.org or again at placefortruth.org. If you're able to give a review or to like this podcast wherever it is that you're downloading it, that really helps us spread the word. And then of course you can just hand it off or send a link to someone that you think might be helped by these interviews. As always, thank you for listening to Theology on the Go, a brief interview about an eternal truth.